Today, we officially terminated Officer James Gilmore, Corporal Jesse Moore II, and Officer Kevin Piner as a result of an internal investigation that uncovered extensive violations of the department's manual rules, policies, which included our standard of conduct, criticism, and use of inappropriate language. This investigation started as a result of a supervisor's routine inspection of a video from Officer Piner's in Clark County. No one told us about this. We discovered it on our own because we have processes and policies in place. After a review of the video, the supervisor discovered two conversations that Officer Piner had. One with Officer Gilmore and the other with Corporal Jesse Moore II. The conversations included disrespectful language, hate-filled speech, and referring to black people as the N-word. They also criticized.
This is Wilmington, Delaware. This press conference by Donnie Williams is dealing with the firing of 3 cops over an extremely disturbing and sad occurrence that what they say, stumble on accidentally. Basically, 3 members of the Wilmington, Delaware Police Force, Corporal Jesse Moore, Officers Kevin Piner, and Brian Gilmore, were fired on Tuesday after Department Audit exposed a disturbingly sad and hateful video of commentary between co-workers where they designated an African-American magistrate the Negro, in addition to a gay slur. Piner tells Moore at one point during the phone call that he feels a civil war is coming and that he's ready, saying he was going to buy a new assault rifle and soon we're just going to go out and start slaughtering them. Niggers. That's what he said. I can't wait. God, I can't wait. Moore apparently wasn't this racist, responded he would not be doing that. This gets even worse and more disturbing, actually. So as they continued the conversation, Piner told Moore that he felt a civil war was needed to wipe them off the fucking map. That'll put them in their place, or they'll put them back 4 or 5 generations. Moore told Piner he was crazy, and the recording stopped for a short time. According to the police, the officers admitted it was their voices on the video and didn't deny the content, while the officers denied that the content was racist. Do you know how wild that is? You are caught on video saying, I want to go out and murder blacks. I can't wait to do it. I am going to buy me a rifle and I am going to be shooting blacks in the fucking face. And that'll put them back 3, 4, 5 generations. Basically, that'll put those Negroes in their place. That's basically what that's saying. It's said in harsh, caustic terms, but ultimately you've heard that speech or that saying before. If you're an African American, this saying is not entirely new, right? You may be shocked by the level of hostility and the level of disgust and just utter hideousness of this commentary. The notion that a cop who's imbued with all sorts of powers is riding around in his police car. And in riding around his police car, he has ideas in his head when he's dealing with the public, when he's dealing with African Americans, that basically, I am waiting for the moment where I can shoot this nigga in the face. Every case that these officers has worked on will be pulled and will be reinvestigated. Of course, there's an incentive to not do a due diligence investigations because the prosecutor, I would imagine, wouldn't necessarily want to rip these cases up, considering these people were put into jail. Basically, how weird and disturbing is this? And how prevalent is this? Think about it for a minute. We imbue cops with all sorts of authority. We give them a gun, we give them a badge, we give them a shield, we give them equipment where they can ride around in these things, tanks that were bought from the battlefield. And we, more importantly, imbue them with this sovereign right of distribution of force. It's almost like the hand of the king of sorts. Whatever the policies and procedures that the government come up with, whether right, wrong, fair, equitable, ethical, or somewhere in between. Do you honestly believe putting a stoner, somebody who's smoking pot, in prison, in a cage, is the best way in dealing with that situation? If you need to deal with that situation at all. Do you believe that's right? Do you believe that's ethical? Do you believe that the end result of putting that person in a cage for smoking a plant is correct? Meaning the destruction of their ability to get a job later on, their inability or the destruction to the family in regards to having this particular person who is maybe a breadwinner in that particular part being ripped out of their societal fabric. Not to mention, you're taking somebody who's basically just doing something like pod and you're bringing them around people who are doing much heavier, worse things. Is that an ethical, judicious outcome to your society engaged in that problem? My point is that basically what laws are made aren't right, wrong, ethical, moral, or otherwise. Those are just the declarations of the power center in your particular society. And in that very specific case, the cops are the brute force end of ensuring that that order is maintained. That person who's given all sorts of authority has those thoughts in his head and felt perfectly comfortable and open to talk, safe space, to his other cops about basically murdering blacks. This is disturbing, to say the least, because you wonder how many of the cops are riding around in cop cars that have this bit of understanding with one another, where they can have these conversations, harbor these type of thoughts, harbor these type of points of view in regards to the public to which they're protecting and serving. This part is also interesting. They made the point that their comments had to do with the stress on law enforcement in the light of the protests over the death of George Floyd. I understand. As a human being, just because something may be right doesn't necessarily mean that the people who are on the bad end of what is right enjoys the fact that they're on that bad end. My dad was never around. I could count on one hand the number of times that my dad and I had any kind of meaningful interactions with one another. Despite the fact that he wasn't necessarily around, I took, especially growing up, a particular point of view of apathy, if not outright disdain, in him not living up to what I at the time considered to be his obligations under that title of dad. He was aggrieved by that. Yes, he accepted it to some degree, but he was still bothered by that, despite the fact that he was the culprit and the inciting factor in that particular point of view. I'm saying, despite the fact that those protests were started by a cop kneeling on a man's throat for 9 minutes, extinguishing his life, kneeling on his throat, by the way, after he died for another 2 minutes. Despite the fact it was started by that, I don't doubt that the cops who are dealing with the protesters and the cops who are not liking all of this new emphasis and focus that the society has put on them and their jobs and the way they go about doing their jobs, especially in the context of dealing with minorities. Each and every case like this makes the point of those protests, however, that much more apt and that much more necessary. Their legitimacy is literally bound into cases like this as these cases are being brought to light. You could feel however you want to feel about it. The fact of the matter is all of this started because of the way your force, not just your force, forces around the United States, do their jobs. You kill 1,000 human beings a year. Put that in perspective. That is abominable. And that's made, by the way, that much more horrendous by the fact that your justice system, 99% of these, give them a walk. This is your cops murdering people. Many of these people are unarmed. Many of these people were shot in the back. And yes, a lot of these people are disproportionately black. But also, keep in mind, the majority of the people who they're killing are white. Yes, they may have more leeway with you, but they will still tase, beat, injure, punch, kick, and shoot you in the face just like they would anybody else if you push them just that much. I don't care that you feel some kind of way about the protests. The protests are there specifically because of heinous and hideous shit like you're thinking right now, that I strongly suspect that this point of view was directed into the actions that you took when you were dealing with the various suspects to which you were dealing with. How could it not? How could it not? Within the context of leeway, of the things in your discretion and the harshness that you can engage certain people over others, and the viciousness, perhaps, the anger that you may express in the context of your going about your job. Yes, that discretion is given by the same token, should it be. Should you go about your job like that? Should you have that mindset? And should we be okay with this mindset? And should shit like this be rooted out of the force? Personally, I think it's in the bricks. I don't think you can root this out. I don't even know how you would go about rooting this out. He perfectly felt he had a safe space. The killing of Floyd was cops' fault. Society's fault to some degree, that those cops into situations that cops shouldn't be involved in. And more importantly, doesn't deal with things like poverty, or doesn't deal with things like, for that matter, wealth disparity, going back from the time of slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, and of course, the preventing of getting certain jobs and living in certain areas. Or redlining. It's disturbing, that's all. Because me, like every other African American, have qualms about this. Well, we're making the point about the cops. We're not making that up. And for the first time in my lifetime, if I think ever, the society agrees. Those cops know that. They know that for the first time, society looks at what they do with their jobs and say, yes, there's a disparity, gross one, in the way that you engage African Americans. There's a disparity, there's a gross one, in the way that our society has dealt with these issues and regarded these issues. And that disparity has all come to a head at once under this issue of defund the police and the protests. He's feeling the heat from that. And his point is, I'm expressing the stress from the heat that I'm feeling from that. But regardless of the stress you're feeling from that, how on earth do you come away with, I want to murder blacks? That's extraordinary and profound. And I would make the point that that was there beforehand and was not entirely a result of the protests. If you want to say that that's a result of the stress you're feeling with the job and whatnot, look, I would agree with you on this point. I would prefer that our society deal with these left behind societies. The federal government has every power in the world to create all the jobs that those people would need who are in those left behind societies to build up this country. Jobs that are not menial, that pay well, and that do real things that need to be accomplished. We just don't do those things. We choose instead to leave it up to the private enterprise to come up with things for these people to do, meeting in these communities. Well, that has failed. We have basically failed in our responsibility to live up to the notion of protecting the social welfare. And we need to attend to that. So from that standpoint, yes, I can agree that sometimes the jobs that cops have to do are not easy jobs. And it can give a certain jadedness associated with it. But that is almost irrelevant to this. Yeah, that's irrelevant to this. We as a society, agree, need to deal with the left behind societies. We as a society needs to take those societies or those communities that are dirt poor, with all of the vagaries that come along with being like that, and lift those up into something that is not. And in doing so, removing the need for cops like this to be patrolling the beat in the first place. This is a disturbing story, but the story needed to be told. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.